Next up, we have Lachlan Evenson taking us through 10 years of Kubernetes.
All right, let's see if we can get this going. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Hello, I'm Lachlan Evenson from Microsoft Azure. How's everyone doing? Isn't this the best way to start your week? Hey, Joe, how you doing? I just want to say 10 years of rejects. You know, I've been to many rejects. It's the best way to start your KubeCon week. Full of energy. I love being here, and you know why I love it? For two reasons. This is a community full of doers and thinkers, and I'm always challenged by you all, so if you see me around today, come up, challenge me, have good conversations. But let's go ahead and get into it. Somebody gave me, an Australian, 10 minutes to do 10 years of Kubernetes. Now, what I want you to think about as I go through this is my perspective and my journey, but I know many of you have been along for this ride as well. So think about your journey in Kubernetes, and if this is your first day, welcome, right? Your journey starts here, but we've all been here for 10 years. Or even today. So let's go ahead and get in it. We buckle up for the ride. We good? All right. I'm going to give you my best energy, so let's go ahead and get into this. But, you know, like all journeys, it starts with a magic moment. So think back. When was the first time you did Docker run? Was that moment transformative for you? For me, my boss at the time, Joe, who's sitting here in third row, said, hey, I've heard about this Docker thing. Come over and check it out. And I was a young, cynical engineer. Ever been one of those? Where you're like, oh, this thing's going to be garbage. How's this going to change my life? Right? And I just remember typing into my terminal, Docker run Redis. Anybody done that? And what happened? Redis ran, right? It was like, whoa, you know. And little did I know that little moment was going to change the trajectory in my life and my career. Anyone else? Yeah, right? But it starts at that moment of magic. Think about that magic moment. But in order for that moment to be magic, right, where were we in 2012, 2013? Wandering around in the desert full of dead trees, right? So let me paint the picture, right? Chef, Ansible, Puppet, remember these things? Remember when I was responsible for a cloud platform and we were trying to provision VMs, and you'd have tools like Chef, Ansible, Puppet. Remember them? Right? What were they? Ways to run your artisanal shell scripts en masse, right? We could get these things done. But you know what? Could you ever debug a recipe, a playbook? They were hard to debug, and stuff was a mess. On top of this, anybody remember DevOps? DevOps was becoming a thing. Developers wanted their machines right now, they wanted them quick. So this was the scene, right? This is the founding place of where this all happened. And why that moment was so magic is because we were looking for something else, right? We were looking, there's got to be a better way. If we're all going to the cloud, we cannot be going to the cloud with those tools. So Joe said to me, well, you've done Docker run Redis. Go ahead and see if you can model this in production. And back in the day, we were in San Francisco. There was a little meetup by a little company called Google. You may have heard of them. And they were talking about this thing called Kubernetes. And that was the first Greek word I knew. I still don't know how to say it right. But we went to this meetup, and all the founders of Kubernetes were there showing Kubernetes off. Joe said to me, hey, you got 1 week. I want you to get one workload up and running on Kubernetes, and let's see if we can get it to prod. I think it took me a day to get one workload up and running. And by the end of that week, we had several workloads on a Kubernetes cluster, and we had a plan to roll it out to prod. So this was Kubernetes 0.7 back in the day, very early. So it was there. We could do what we needed to do, even with it bare bones back in the day. Now, I want to think about the staying power of Kubernetes and really what it's made it strong, and this community very strong. And it's kind of this concept of community. So I think the creators of Kubernetes had several really great ideas. The first one was to create the CNCF and put Kubernetes in it. What that did was allowed multiple companies and communities to start rallying around Kubernetes to build it. I think the other thing was Kubernetes wasn't finished when it was open sourced. It was very, very bare bones. So the community had to come along and build it together. Finally, and I think this is one of the big things, is community. Kubernetes focused on community. Back in the day, if you wanted to get into Kubernetes, they had weekly, was it weekly or monthly community meetings? Weekly. And if you were lucky enough to go to one of these meetings, you would have been greeted by a friendly face. That friendly face was Sarah Novotny, saying, welcome, you are here, we're going to build this together. And I went back in those days to see that kind of energy and people rallying around this idea of Kubernetes. So those were the things I think really got Kubernetes to take. It's the community and going together and building it together. Now I want to revisit, we got to prod, and I think, this is an apt kind of photo. People talk about cattle and pets, I talk about plants and forests. So potted plants here. Was Kubernetes really ready for production? No. So in July of 2015, I got on stage at Kubernetes 1.0 launch and said, we're in prod with Kubernetes. I was happy at 1.0 to get crash loop back off. That didn't exist before 1.0. We didn't even have stateful workload support in Kubernetes. We didn't even have persistent volumes. We didn't have CNI. Remember those days? And we got to production with 1.0. But look at what we built. Look at what we built together, right? It's amazing how far we've come, and everybody in this room and around the world have done that together. I think that is really the power of Kubernetes. But it's not all been roses, and holding the line is a big thing. I think what Kubernetes did great was it said, this is core, and that's everything else. And we built extension points very early into Kubernetes through things like custom resources or third-party resources, as they were called in the early days, if you remember them, TPRs. But it was, this is core, we keep the code base really slim and light in the core, and then there's an ecosystem of tools around Kubernetes that support it. And I think that was a really crucial point. But that is still something that's in the making. So anybody remember the container wars? Where were you in the container wars, right? Yes, Rocket, we had different runtimes. We had different container orchestrators, right? They were all out there. You may have heard of our friends like Mesos and Docker Swarm. So Kubernetes and the power of Kubernetes, the community was able to go and make it so strong and so compelling to use Kubernetes that those other orchestrators all but disappeared. But it wasn't without some learnings. I see Lucas in the audience here. I remember when Solomon got up on stage and said, Docker Swarm, one command, I have a cluster. And Kubernetes went, oh my goodness, it's like 50,000 commands and I still don't have a cluster. And I think Lucas was probably in 5th grade, and he wrote kubeadm as a response to Solomon. So that, again, we have kubeadm as a response to Solomon being on stage go, I'm going to beat you, Kubernetes. And who got the last laugh? Don't tell Solomon. Now we have one platform to rule them all, right? Kubernetes is a lingua franca of all the major cloud providers. You can go get a managed Kubernetes offering from anyone. Probably somebody on the street will sell you one too, right? So we are there. Kubernetes has reached the promised land. We are there, but it's not over. It's not over. So when we think about the last few years in this journey, Kubernetes 2.0. If you go and Google Kubernetes 2.0, you'll find threads. Every 2 years it kicks up. I think we're about due, right? Somebody launched another one. There is always the constant opinions and always the constant ideation to go and rebuild the thing that we've already built. But I want to encourage you that Kubernetes 1.0 is still alive and well, and we've actually integrated a lot of ideas from 2.0. But this will, be fraught, and the future will always be, hey, how about we rewrite this whole thing? Now, a couple of other things were happening. In 2017, a little company called OpenAI had the opportunity to work on their clusters. They had 1,000-node clusters on AWS, and they were moving to things called GPUs, and they were going to go and build this AI thing. You may have heard of it, ChatGPT. They were building that on Kubernetes without GPU support. Kubernetes was not built for AI workloads, yet Kubernetes was able to be modified, and it's a platform for building platforms. And OpenAI went on stage saying they had 2,000 node clusters. They now have 100,000 node clusters. They were 7,500 node clusters back then. But AI and the AI revolution is powered by the cloud native revolution and Kubernetes under the hood. I want to encourage you all that you've all had part in this as well, building this AI renaissance. And finally, it is said that Kubernetes is boring. I like to say that Kubernetes is everywhere, like DNS and IP addresses, right? We love them, not really, but they're everywhere for a reason, right? They get the job done. The internet and the world relies on the backbone of DNS and IP and Kubernetes. I don't know what the percentage is now, but a large percentage of the internet is served off Kubernetes clusters, which is absolutely fantastic. So it is out there, and it is fueling the next wave of innovation. So every time you see Perplexity, every time you see all these AI companies, they are using tools like Kubernetes to actually build and deliver that AI. So that's what I think the future is how do we go build and solve the challenges yet to come. But what I do know is with the community, we can build anything. Kubernetes wasn't built for half of these workloads, yet we've modified it in a way that it can power the next generation of workloads. And when I think about Kubernetes, what is Kubernetes? Is it a set of binaries? Is it a set of APIs? To me, it might sound cliche, but it's actually everybody in this room and around the world. Kubernetes is the people, and it's the people powering the revolution more than the binaries and the things that you pick up and the endpoints that you... So those values that were founded at the start of the Kubernetes journey with the founders of the project, community over company, have seen to stand the test of times. So I think whatever the problem is in the future, I'm not going to crystal ball and give you an answer, but I know that we can meet it. And with that, I'll wrap up. I'm around all day and for the rest of the week. If you want to learn more from me or my journey or share your journey with me, I'd encourage you. And you can stop by the Microsoft booth and I'll be giving away some books later this week. So really appreciate you all. Thanks for having me on stage. Adios.